What's up, guys? It's Jim with Awakened TCG, and today we are going to be going over the first semi-large OP06 tournament. It's actually going to be PPG's online case tournament. This was a tournament with about 256 players. I think there was a bit less that actually showed, but almost 256 players, which is definitely the biggest and first OP06 tournament that I think can show us some results that are kind of going to show what's going to play out in our meta here in the West. These deck lists here are provided by EggmanEvents.com. If you guys don't know, provided by Eggman, a great website for tournament results and deck lists as well. So I will definitely have that linked in the description. But let's go ahead and go over these lists. So the total leader breakdown here on the right. Looks like we have a majority of Sakazuki at 60 Sakazuki players by nobody's surprise, followed by Katakuri at second, which is actually pretty interesting. I would have guessed it would have been Moria, but I guess people are really liking Katakuri right now, and rightfully so. The deck is really, really strong. But yeah, Morio trailing behind at 30 entrants, and Enel right behind at 25, right next to Yamato, and Reiju, Perona and Uta following suit, and the rest are kind of not as populated. But I'd say out of these leaders here that we can actually see, I'd say, yeah, this is for the most part going to be the meta. I don't really think there's any like big contenders that are missing right now, at least as far as I'm aware of. And I think this is pretty correct, minus the Moria. I think Moria is probably like first, second best deck. So I think if I'm trying to win, I think there should be a little more Morias here. And going into the top 16 results here, it actually shows that. So Moria having one of the best conversion rates out of any of these decks. As you can see, going from a small sliver here to a total of 4, being the second most represented leader in the top 16. Right behind Sakazuki at 5. So Katakuri still showing well in 3 in the top 16. Pretty good conversion rate. It's almost the exact same, I'd say. And then Reiju actually showing up at 2 at the 4th most leader. I think this deck is a really good deck, but it has a little bit of variance. Seeing stage early really helps out, and I think there's a few matchups that if you just run into early, no amount of skill can get you through it. If you run into Red Purple Law as Reiju, I think it's kind of just over. There's not a lot of skill that can get you through that matchup. And then even Reiju mirrors are pretty terrible. It is a deck I'll be playing this set, but for those two reasons, I'm just a little bit hesitant to bring it to big tournaments. And then Yamato and Zoro, very interestingly, even though it was not one of the most represented leaders in the leader breakdown, it actually did make it into the top 16 here, which is really interesting. And we're actually going to look at the list because it is not a normal Zoro list. This is a very, very interesting Zoro list for sure. And then one of Yamato making it into it. I think Yamato, honestly, I don't have the confidence in Yamato. Like, if I'm going to a big tournament trying to win, I'm probably not bringing this leader. I think just a little too dependent on luck and dependent on your opponent not having 2Ks early or just not running into matchups with a ton of blockers. A bit volatile of a leader here for sure. But let's go ahead and look at the first place list. I don't really think this is a mind-blowing list at all. It is honestly pretty standard. Let's get it over here. So as we can see, you've got your typical package here with the Navy stuff. The new edition of the Tashigi Searcher is going to be a reason Sakazuki is going to be a big problem this set. Having another way to search out Hound Blaze and stuff like your Kuzans, Borsalinos, etc. is just going to be insanely strong. And then obviously the big reason that black is the best deck, has the best decks this meta, is going to be this 8-cost Moria at 4 of. Running it at any less is just incorrect. Bringing out Rebecca's and stuff is just way too strong. But yeah, super strong deck list, and let's go ahead and look what is up next. Looks like we've got a couple more Sakazukis, and the highest placing Katakuri here is going to be this list here. We've got new inclusions being the 2-cost Banish Nami, a really, really strong card. It's just Thunderbolt that has counter and also has arguably a better on-play effect. Thunderbolt late game used to let you go for game sometimes. This one can't exactly do that, but it has its own use, especially early game with a leader that can swing for 7 pretty easily. And then any other new cards, looks like not a lot minus the reject at 2. I thought Katakuri's ran more. I'm not 100% familiar, but definitely a card that is going to squeak out some games sometimes. And the Kiku Nojo, of course, a fantastic trigger. Probably the best character trigger ever introduced into this game. Fantastic deck here. And next up here, we've got the highest placing Gecko Moria. Let's look at this list here. We have a pretty standard Moria list. This one, I think the only oddity being the 4 of Ice Age is pretty crazy. And the no Hina. I think Cross AI was talking about that on Twitter. Wraith could probably give you a better explanation. But yeah, the 4 of Ice Age is apparently the wave lately. So if you're playing Moria, I think it's the way to go at the moment. But let's go over another Moria list because we actually have right here Ernesto Nares. My co-host on this channel actually got 12th place in this tournament. So let's take a look at his list. I'm not going to go over in detail because he can probably give you a better explanation than me. He's actually playing in a tournament right now with the same list. But yeah, he actually chose to run the Hina, which is probably just preference if I had to assume. And then from there, 2 of Ice Age, pretty standard numbers here. It's just your standard Moria list, bringing out the 4-cost Thriller Barks. And the Lucci and the Navy stuff is always good as well. And then next up here, the Yamato, although only having 1 showing, actually went 7-1 and ended up getting 6th place out of 256 players, which is very impressive and shows how good this deck really can be. This one here, choosing to run the Don Quixote and Supernova package, able to search the 8-cost Kit out and the 2-cost Rocinante, Sugar, whatever else. I haven't seen a ton of these running Sugar, so I think the Sugar is really interesting. Also a great way to get rid of blockers for your Yamato, going for game in the late game. But this is going to be the more Fortress-centered version with the 8-cost Kid, just kind of stalling late game and then going for game with stuff like Hody Jones. Is very, very strong and really, really light on the yellow. As we can see, we're just running Onami, which is probably one of the best yellow cards in the game, and it's just way too good not to run in this deck. And next up here, let's go ahead and look at our Reiju deck. Really interested here as this is the deck I'm going to be running this set. And from the looks of it, it is a very standard Reiju list. We have our unsuited and suited up versions of every single Vinsmoke member. Even the Yonji blocker, which I think is a bit more of a hot topic. For instance, in my list, I actually don't run Yonji. I just don't think he really works, especially with all the removal now in the meta. You play against a Prona and you play this guy, they just rest him for free. He didn't really do anything. You play against any black deck, free removal. I just don't think he's a great spot and not a great blocker that I'd really want to play out and clog up spots in my deck. But this one choosing to run it. And from there, I think the only interesting topic to talk about, besides this new Charlotte Pudding, which every blue deck is pretty much running nowadays, at least a 2 of, is going to be the Black Bug here. I'm sure some of you don't know what this card does. This one is going to be a 4-cost main event. If the number of Don cards on your field is equal to or less than the number on your opponent's, place one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 5 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. With a trigger, that bottom deck's a 4 or less character. So this is literally purple 3000 Worlds with the caveat that you have to have equal Don or less with your opponent, which is obviously very easy for Reiju. So running a 3000 Worlds that is also searchable off Germa Kingdom and the Germa 66 event is very, very strong, especially against these black decks that sometimes we just can't get through. This card is going to allow us to do that and go for game when we otherwise couldn't have. So great deck list here, and congrats on their placing. And next up here, we've got, last but not least, our Zoro deck that managed to squeak into top 16 at number 16. This one's very interesting, so I'm excited to go over it. We actually have a Revolutionary Army Zoro list here that somehow went 6-2. And got top 16. So I've actually heard murmurs about this deck at my locals. They were talking about that this deck is pretty solid, and honestly did not believe them until now. If we can perform this well, this deck might actually be really good. So we're running the Luffy's and Zoros, right, like usual, with the Nami Searcher, only a 2 of, but still our Straw Hat Searchables, Deable Jambe, Radical Beam, etc. But we also have an extra searcher on top of Bello Betty, which can search our 2K Koalas and then anything from an Ivankov, Karasu, etc. And then this new 5-cost Emporio Ivankov, which I think is the reason this deck can work, because you can get absolutely insane turns by playing this 5-drop Ivankov into another Ivankov into any 4-cost from your hand, including Karasu, Lindbergh, or Inazuma. So very, very insane board flood for 5 Dawn, which is something Zoro had, but they were with smaller bodies, right? Like these Bello Bettys or some like a 3K to Dawn. Now, developing these 5Ks and 6Ks at the same rate is kind of scary, especially on a leader that can buff them so easily. But yeah, really interesting list there, and congrats on the top 16. And that is going to be the entirety of top 16 and all the leaders that we went over. Congrats to Wraith on his 12th place here. Definitely could have done better, had a few interesting interactions in a few of his games. He could probably tell you about it later, but definitely a fun tournament, and I think a great showing for what this meta has to come. Sokka still being top 1, unfortunately, but the ban is coming, so use it while you can, guys. Use it and abuse it. But anyway, that is going to be the video. Hope you guys have a great day. I'm going to head out of here. Peace.